Emily had always imagined her life turning out in a peaceful, steady way. She never wished for anything big or fancy. All she ever wanted was a home filled with trust, calm evenings, and someone who understood her heart. For many years, she believed she had found exactly that. Her partner, Daniel, had once been the person she trusted more than anyone. She had shared her plans with him, her secrets, her laughter, and even her fears. She believed he cared just as deeply as she did. But the truth came quietly, almost silently, and it broke her in a way she never expected. It happened on a normal morning. Emily woke up early, as always, expecting to find Daniel making coffee like he usually did. Instead, the house was strangely still. The kitchen was empty, the bedroom closet half open, and the drawers pulled out just enough for her to notice that something was missing. At first, she stood there blinking, thinking maybe he went on an early errand. But then she found a small note on the dining table, only 2 lines, written in a rushed, uneven hand. He didn't explain much. He didn't apologize. He didn't even say goodbye properly. He simply wrote that he needed a different life. Emily read the note so many times her eyes began to burn. Each word felt like a sharp blade slipping deeper into her chest. She sank into the nearest chair, feeling the world tilt beneath her. It wasn't just that he left, it was how he left. Without a talk, without a warning, without giving her a chance to ask why. She had spent years giving him her time, her patience, and her loyalty. And he walked out, as if none of it mattered. For the first few days, she moved through her home like a quiet shadow. She kept expecting to hear his footsteps, his voice, or the familiar sound of him closing the front gate. But each hour that passed made it clearer. He wasn't coming back. The truth dug into her heart, turning her confidence into dust. She would look into the mirror and barely recognize herself. Her eyes looked tired, her shoulders felt heavy, and her smile, something she used to wear easily, had disappeared. Friends tried to comfort her, but she wasn't ready to hear their words. Everyone said the same thing. You deserve better. Or, you'll find someone new. Or, it's his loss. But Emily didn't believe any of it. She felt unwanted, rejected, and broken in a very quiet way that no one else could truly see. Nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone she trusted so much could leave her so easily. She replayed every memory, trying to figure out if she had missed a sign or made a mistake that pushed him away. But no answer came. After weeks of this painful routine, Emily realized she could not stay in the same house anymore. Everywhere she looked, she saw pieces of her life with him. Photos, cups they used, the small plant he liked, the chair he always sat in. All these little things made her heart tighten again and again. She needed space. She needed distance. She needed to breathe without reminders of the past pulling her back. So, she made a quiet decision. She would move far from the city and start over. Not because she was ready, but because staying meant sinking deeper into sadness. She searched for a place where no one knew her history, where no one would ask questions, and where she could learn to stand again without fear of falling apart. That's how she found a small rural town, many miles away. It was simple, quiet, surrounded by fields and open skies. The kind of place where mornings were slow and the air felt fresh, like a gentle reminder that life could still change. When Emily arrived, she immediately felt the difference. The town had only one main road, a small grocery shop, a bakery that smelled like warm bread, and a handful of people who greeted her with polite smiles. But even here, her heart felt heavy. She didn't arrive with excitement or hope, she arrived with exhaustion. She had no expectations, no dreams, and no desire for anything more than a peaceful corner to exist in. Her new home was a small wooden house with a porch that faced a field of tall grass. On her first night there, she sat outside, listening to the quiet hum of insects and the soft wind moving through the grass. It was so peaceful that it almost hurt. She hugged her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how alone she truly was. The silence made her remember everything she had tried to forget. Her chest tightened again, and tears slipped down her face before she could stop them. Still, she didn't turn away from the pain. She knew this loneliness was part of the healing she had not yet learned to accept. Every wound has its own time. Every heart takes its own path. Emily reminded herself that moving away did not erase her past, but it gave her space to breathe without feeling crushed under it. The next morning, she woke early and walked into town to find work. She didn't want to stay locked inside the house all day. She needed something to keep her mind busy. She learned that the nearby ranch needed extra hands for daily chores. It wasn't the kind of job she had ever imagined doing, but she didn't mind. Hard work felt like the only thing strong enough to cover the noise inside her thoughts. When she first stepped onto the ranch, she noticed the peaceful rhythm of the place. Horses walked calmly in their fenced areas. The barn smelled of hay and fresh air. And the owner, Mrs. Collins, greeted her with a warm smile. The woman was in her late 60s, gentle in her tone but strong in her presence. She listened carefully as Emily explained she was looking for work, and without asking personal questions, she hired her immediately. Emily's first day at the ranch was tiring but strangely comforting. She learned how to feed the horses, clean the stables, and carry tools from one place to another. Each task kept her body moving and her mind quiet. She liked that no one here knew her story. She liked that she didn't have to pretend to be fine. People respected her space, and she appreciated it more than she could ever say. But even in this peaceful environment, the sadness inside her didn't disappear. It stayed with her like a shadow, silent but always present. Sometimes when she was alone brushing a horse or stacking hay, she felt tears gather in her eyes for reasons she couldn't fully explain. Sometimes her heart would begin to race without warning, reminding her of the pain she still carried. But she never allowed herself to break down completely. She swallowed the hurt, took deep breaths, and kept working. Days passed, turning into weeks. Emily slowly created a routine she could trust. She woke early, prepared simple meals, worked at the ranch until evening, and returned home tired enough to fall asleep almost immediately. She wasn't happy, but she wasn't drowning either. She existed in a quiet middle place, where she didn't expect life to surprise her anymore. Deep down, she believed that love was something that had already passed her by. She convinced herself that no one would ever want her again. Not after everything she had been through. Not after everything she had lost. She told herself it was fine. She didn't need anyone. She didn't want to risk her heart again. But life, as she would soon discover, had a way of bringing unexpected people at the most unexpected times. People who see the pieces others overlook. People who don't walk away when things get difficult. People who try to save what is left, even when they don't fully understand how broken it is. Emily had no idea that such a person was about to enter her life. Not yet, not now, but soon, very soon. Life at the ranch quickly became the center of Emily's days. The wide open land, the slow mornings, and the sound of horses moving gently in their stalls created a new rhythm she could follow without thinking too much. She liked that the ranch did not demand anything from her heart, only her hands, her focus, and her effort. It was the kind of work that kept her body tired and her mind calmer than it had been in months. Every morning, Emily arrived just after sunrise. The sky would still be painted in soft orange and pink shades, and the air felt cool against her skin. She always paused for a moment before starting her chores, breathing in the fresh smell of hay and earth. For that brief moment, she felt like the world was giving her a small, quiet hug. It wasn't enough to fix her heart, but it was enough to help her take another step. Mrs. Collins, the ranch owner, noticed how dedicated Emily was. She didn't talk much, but she worked hard, finishing every task with careful attention. Mrs. Collins never asked about her past, but she had kind eyes that seemed to understand more than she said. Sometimes she would hand Emily a cup of warm tea and say, "You're doing well, dear. Take a moment." Emily always thanked her quietly, feeling grateful for the gentle understanding. The ranch was not a busy place, but it was full of small details that made it feel alive. The horses were calm, intelligent creatures, each one with a personality of its own. Emily enjoyed learning their habits, how one horse liked to nudge her pockets looking for treats, while another preferred to be brushed slowly along the neck. The animals didn't judge her. They didn't know her past. They simply accepted her presence, and that simple acceptance comforted her more than she expected. Her tasks were simple but constant. She swept the stables, filled buckets with fresh water, stacked bales of hay, fed the horses, and sometimes helped repair broken fences. The work kept her moving from morning to afternoon, leaving little time for the thoughts that used to overwhelm her. She enjoyed that. The quiet, steady pace of ranch life felt like a blanket that covered the noise inside her heart. Despite the peaceful surroundings, Emily still felt lonely. She spoke only when needed and kept her distance from the few workers who came by. She didn't want to form new connections. She didn't want anyone to ask questions that would lead her back to memories she was trying so hard to leave behind. She wasn't rude. She simply stayed in her own safe corner, speaking softly, smiling politely, but never letting anyone close enough to see the broken parts inside her. But Mrs. Collins could see what others overlooked. She noticed how Emily's shoulders sometimes tightened when someone asked a personal question. She noticed the sadness that flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. She never pushed, never questioned, she simply offered kindness in small, gentle ways. A warm meal at lunchtime. A short break when the sun was too hot. A few calm words whenever Emily seemed overwhelmed. It was the kind of kindness that didn't demand anything in return. And over time, Emily found herself appreciating it more than she could express. One afternoon, while fixing a fence near the far side of the ranch, Emily paused to take a sip of water. The sun was high, turning the open field into a golden sheet that shimmered with heat. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and sat down on a wooden beam for a moment. As she looked around, she felt a strange peace settle over her. She was far from the life she used to know, far from the pain of her broken heart, far from the people who knew her story. Out here, she was just Emily, a woman doing her best to keep moving forward. She wondered, just for a moment, if this quiet life could ever feel like home. The thought surprised her, because she didn't expect to feel any connection to this place. But something about the ranch made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was the open space. Maybe it was the routine. Maybe it was simply the distance from her past. Whatever it was, she held on to it gently, afraid that even a small hope might break if she gripped it too tightly. The days continued in the same steady rhythm. Emily worked, rested, ate meals alone, slept early, and repeated the cycle the next day. It wasn't a joyful life, but it was a stable one. For now, stability was more than enough. She still had moments where her heart tightened unexpectedly, sometimes triggered by a memory or a passing thought. But those moments didn't crush her the way they used to. Here, she had space to feel without falling apart. Sometimes at night, she would sit on her porch, watching stars fill the sky. The silence felt lighter than the silence of her old home. It didn't remind her of loss. It reminded her of possibility. She didn't know what kind of future waited for her, and she didn't dare to expect anything more than the simple life she had now. But something inside her had begun to shift very slowly, like a tiny flame trying to glow after being almost extinguished. One evening, as she brushed one of the horses, Mrs. Collins walked over and stood beside her. "You've done a good job here," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think, Emily." Emily paused, her hand on the horse's neck. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. But those words stayed with her long after she went home that night. Strong. No one had called her strong in a long time. She didn't believe it yet, but hearing someone else say it made a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Still, even with the small moments of comfort, loneliness clung to her in quiet ways. She didn't want companionship, she told herself. She didn't want warmth, trust, or anything that could break again. She convinced herself that she was better off alone, that she didn't deserve or need anything more. She had been hurt once deeply and she couldn't imagine letting anyone close enough to hurt her again. But life has its own plans, and it does not always wait for a heart to be ready. Emily didn't know that her calm, predictable days were about to change. She didn't know that someone was soon coming back to the ranch. Someone who would notice the things she tried so hard to hide. Someone who would look at her not with pity, but with understanding. Someone who would not walk away, even when she tried to keep her distance. This person would enter her life as quietly as a shadow, and as gently as the breeze that moved through the fields. She would try to ignore him, but he would keep showing up. She would try to stay distant, but he would keep breaking her silence with kindness she didn't know how to refuse. Emily had no idea that the cowboy who was about to return would change the direction of her life in a way she never expected and never believed she deserved. But that moment was waiting just ahead, closer than she realized. The day Luke returned to the ranch began like any other morning for Emily. She arrived early, as she always did, to sweep the stables and prepare the morning feed. The sun had barely risen, and the soft glow of dawn spread gently across the fields. Everything looked calm, the way she liked it: quiet, predictable, peaceful. She didn't know that today would be different. She didn't know someone was coming who would notice her in a way no one had in a long time. Emily was busy stacking hay when she heard the sound of a truck rolling up the dirt road. The engine hummed steadily, getting louder as it approached. She didn't pay much attention at first. Delivery trucks and ranch vehicles came and went every week. But this one sounded familiar to the workers nearby, because she noticed two of them look up, smile, and whisper, "Luke's back." She heard the name but didn't think much of it. She kept working, brushing hay off her jeans. A few minutes later, the truck stopped near the barn, and she heard footsteps approaching, slow, steady, confident. She didn't look up until she heard Mrs. Collins's cheerful voice calling out, "Welcome back, Luke." Emily finally raised her head, and that was the first time she saw him. Luke was tall, with a calm, steady presence that filled the space around him. His clothes were simple, worn from work, and he carried himself with an easy confidence that made it clear he belonged to this land, these fields, this sky. He smiled politely at Mrs. Collins and gave her a warm hug. Even from a distance, Emily could see the kindness in his expression. There was nothing loud or showy about him. Instead, he looked like someone who chose his words carefully and meant them sincerely. As he talked with Mrs. Collins, his eyes slowly moved around the ranch, taking in everything he had been away from for months. When his gaze finally landed on Emily, she felt something strange, almost like he noticed her in a deeper way than others usually did. Not in a bold or uncomfortable way, but in a gentle, curious way, as if he sensed something quiet inside her. Emily quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her work again. She wasn't used to anyone looking at her. She preferred staying in the background, keeping her distance, blending into the rhythm of ranch life. The last thing she wanted was attention, especially from someone she didn't know. But Luke kept watching her for a moment longer, not out of interest but out of instinct. He had always been good at sensing things in people, things they didn't say, things they tried to hide, and something about the way Emily carried herself, her soft steps, her lowered gaze, the tired sadness in her posture made him pause. After a few minutes, Mrs. Collins called Emily over. "Come here, dear. I want to introduce you to someone." Emily's heart tightened with nervousness. She wasn't ready to meet new people, especially someone who had known the ranch long before she arrived. But she had no choice. She walked over slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Emily, this is Luke," Mrs. Collins said warmly. "He's worked here for years. He just got back from helping a friend out in another town." Luke removed his hat politely and smiled at her. It was a soft, respectful smile, the kind that didn't push or expect anything. "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said in a calm, friendly tone. She nodded shyly. "Nice to meet you too." Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. She didn't hold eye contact for more than a second. Luke noticed her shyness, but didn't rush to speak again. Instead, he simply nodded with understanding. Mrs. Collins went back to the house, leaving the two of them standing near the barn. Emily quickly stepped back toward her work area, hoping Luke wouldn't try to start a conversation. To her relief, he didn't. He lifted his bag from the truck and walked toward the small cabin behind the barn, greeting a few workers on his way. Later that morning, Luke began helping with the chores. Emily tried to stay out of his way, but ranch duties had a way of bringing people together. When she was fixing the fence, he walked over with a box of new nails. "You need a hand?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "I can manage." He didn't argue. Instead, he knelt beside her and started working quietly. He didn't talk much, but his presence was calming, not heavy or demanding. For several minutes they worked side by side, the only sounds being the hammer hitting the wood and the wind moving through the field. Eventually, Luke spoke in a soft voice. "Mrs. Collins says you've been doing good work here." Emily didn't know how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable, especially when she didn't feel deserving of them. "I just do what needs to be done," she replied, keeping her eyes on the fence. "That's a good way to be," he said simply. There was no judgment, no pressure, just a simple, honest statement. Emily allowed herself a small breath of relief. He wasn't trying to get close. He wasn't trying to pry into her life. He was just working beside her. As days passed, Luke became part of her routine. He didn't follow her around or ask personal questions. But he noticed things, small things. The way she avoided crowded areas, the way she looked down when someone talked to her, the way her hands shook slightly when she lifted something too heavy, the way she forced a smile when she was tired. Luke didn't say anything about it, but he adjusted his behavior to make things easier for her. If she struggled with a task, he quietly stepped in. If she was reaching for something heavy, he gently lifted it before she could hurt herself. If she was alone in the far corner of the ranch, he would walk by not to talk, but just to make sure she was safe. Emily pretended not to notice, but she did. And every time he helped her, something unstable inside her grew steady for a moment. One afternoon, when she was brushing a horse, Luke walked over with a bucket of fresh water. "You missed lunch," he said softly. Emily blinked in surprise. "I was just working." "You should eat," he said calmly. "Work will still be here after." She opened her mouth to protest, but he gently placed the bucket down and handed her an apple. "Take a break for 5 minutes," he encouraged. "You deserve it." No one had said those words to her in months. She held the apple, unsure whether to accept this small kindness. Luke didn't wait for her answer. He simply walked away, giving her space. That simple act stayed with her for the rest of the day. Luke wasn't trying to replace anyone from her past. He wasn't pushing her to open up. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He was simply being kind in a quiet, patient way, the kind of kindness she didn't know how to handle anymore. But it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, noticed. In the evenings, when she went home tired and sore, she found her thoughts drifting toward him. She didn't want them to, but they did. She found herself remembering his gentle smile, the calm way he spoke, the steady way he helped without being asked. She didn't want to feel connected to anyone. She was afraid of it, but the thought of Luke somehow brought a soft warmth into her lonely evenings. Still, she told herself not to think too much. She reminded herself that he was just being polite, just being helpful, just being a good coworker. People like him didn't see people like her in any special way. He was probably kind to everyone, but somewhere deep inside her, deeper than she was ready to admit, Emily felt a tiny shift, a small crack opening in the wall she had built. Luke wasn't trying to enter her life, but he was gently making space in it. Without demanding, without forcing, without even realizing it himself. And Emily, without meaning to, without wanting to, without even believing she deserved it, was slowly letting him. The more days Emily spent working around Luke, the harder it became for her to ignore the small changes happening inside her. She had grown used to silence, used to keeping her thoughts hidden, used to believing that no one would ever care enough to notice her pain. But Luke was different. He didn't push her with questions, yet he understood her silence. He didn't try to solve her struggles, yet he stood close enough to make them feel lighter. His presence had a way of soothing the noise inside her, even when she didn't want it to. It started with little things. Emily would walk toward the tool shed, and somehow Luke would already be there, handing her what she needed without her asking. When she fed the horses, He appeared beside her and helped carry the buckets, not because she asked, but because he noticed her hands shaking from the weight. When she fixed fences, he silently worked next to her, making the job go twice as fast. He wasn't trying to impress her. It was simply who he was, a man whose kindness came from instinct, not intention. Emily found it confusing. She had spent so long believing that kindness always came with conditions. But with Luke, nothing felt forced. He never asked for anything in return. He never tried to get close in a way that made her feel cornered. He moved around her gently, as if he knew her heart needed space to breathe. One afternoon, Emily was carrying a large bag of feed toward the barn. She thought she could lift it, but halfway there, her grip loosened and the bag slipped from her arms. It burst open, sending feed across the ground. The sound startled the horses nearby, and Emily froze, staring at the mess. Her eyes stung with frustration. She hated feeling weak, hated being reminded of her limits, hated the thought that anyone would see her fail. Before she could crouch down to start cleaning, she felt a shadow fall beside her. Luke knelt on the ground and began gathering the feed without saying a word. His movements were calm, steady, respectful. "You don't have to," Emily began, her voice trembling with embarrassment. "I know," he said softly, "but I want to help." Something in his tone made the tightness in her chest loosen. There was no judgment in his voice, no impatience, no hint of pity, just assurance. Together, they cleaned up the mess. Luke tied up a new bag and lifted it with one hand. Emily watched him for a moment, noticing the natural strength in his movements, not the kind that showed off, but the kind that simply existed, steady, practical, dependable. "I should have been more careful," she said quietly. "It happens to everyone," Luke replied. "You don't have to carry everything alone." Those words settled deep inside her. She didn't respond, but something warm spread through her chest. She wasn't used to someone sharing her burdens. She wasn't used to feeling supported without feeling guilty. She wasn't used to someone noticing her struggles and stepping in so gently. Later that same day, rain clouds rolled in unexpectedly. The sky darkened, and the wind picked up quickly. Emily rushed to bring the horses inside before the storm hit. She worked fast, but the wind made the animals restless. One of the younger horses, startled by the thunder, pulled back suddenly, nearly dragging Emily with it. Before she could lose her balance, a hand closed firmly around her arm and pulled her upright. It was Luke. "Careful," he said, steadying her. His grip was strong but controlled, keeping her anchored while the horse calmed down. Emily's heart raced, not from fear, but from the sudden closeness. She looked up at him, rain beginning to fall on both of them, and for the first time she noticed something she had never allowed herself to see before. His eyes were not just kind, they were understanding, patient, and quietly protective. "Are you hurt?" he asked, brushing a piece of wet hair away from her face so he could see her clearly. She shook her head. "I'm okay," but the way she said it told him she was shaken. He didn't leave her side until the horses were safe inside the barn. When the door closed behind them, the storm outside turned into heavy rain, pounding against the roof. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she felt. Luke walked over and placed a dry blanket around her shoulders. She stiffened at first, not used to being cared for so directly. But the warmth sank into her slowly, and she didn't push it away. "You work too hard," Luke said gently. "You keep pushing yourself, even when you're tired." "I have to," she whispered. "Why?" Emily looked down at her boots. "Because doing nothing feels worse." Luke nodded, understanding more than her words revealed. He could see that she was holding on to pain she hadn't spoken about. He didn't ask. He didn't push. He simply stood beside her, letting her know she wasn't alone in the storm. For a moment, Emily felt something she thought she had lost forever, a sense of closeness. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something simpler, softer. A connection she didn't know she needed until it touched her heart. That night, after the storm passed, and she walked home under the cool evening sky, Emily found herself thinking about Luke more than she wanted to. His gentle voice, his steady hands, the way he looked at her with quiet concern. It all replayed in her mind. She tried to remind herself that she wasn't ready for something new. Her heart was still bruised. She wasn't strong enough to trust anyone. She wasn't ready to let someone see the wounds she was hiding. She told herself Luke was just being kind, that he would treat anyone the same way. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She had seen the way he looked at others, friendly, polite, respectful. But the way he looked at her was different, softer, deeper, as if he was searching for something beneath her silence. Over the next few days, Luke continued showing up in small but meaningful ways. He brought her gloves when he noticed her hands getting cold. He left a bottle of water near her tools on hot days. He fixed things she didn't even realize were broken. He quietly created space for her to speak if she ever wanted to, but never made her feel like she had to. And without understanding why, Emily began to open up in tiny ways. She said, "Thank you," more often. She let herself smile when Luke told a small joke. She allowed herself to walk beside him instead of behind him. She even found herself talking about small things, like the horses she liked most, or the parts of the ranch work she enjoyed. For Emily, these little steps felt huge. Every word she shared felt like handing someone a fragile piece of her heart. But Luke took each piece with care, never letting it fall. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emily sat on her porch staring at the sky. The colors reminded her of calm mornings and quiet hopes. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and leaned back in her chair. She didn't hear him approach at first. It wasn't until she saw a soft light moving across the yard that she turned to look. Luke was walking toward her with a lantern in one hand. "You walked home in the dark," he said gently. "I wanted to make sure you got here safe." Emily blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied. "But you're part of the ranch now. We look out for each other." Something in her heart softened so deeply that she didn't know how to stop it. She didn't have the strength to push it away. She didn't want to. Luke placed the lantern near her door, nodded once, and turned to leave. But before he walked away completely, he glanced back at her. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "I'm here." Emily watched him go, her heart beating faster than she liked. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel unwanted. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel broken beyond repair. She felt seen, and that simple feeling scared her but also warmed her in a way she couldn't ignore. She didn't know where this slow, delicate connection was heading. She didn't trust her heart enough to expect anything. But she knew one thing for certain. Luke had begun to change her life. Not with grand gestures, but with small kindnesses that reached places inside her she had forgotten existed. Emily's recovery took longer than she expected, but maybe that was a blessing in disguise. For the first time in years, she was forced to slow down, sit still, and allow others to help her. She had always been the type of person who carried her own weight, solved her own problems, and fixed her own wounds, even when those wounds were inside her heart. But now, with her injured arm wrapped carefully in a soft sling, she couldn't rely on her own strength. And so, she had to let someone else step close. That someone was Luke. He came every single day, sometimes early in the morning when the sun was just rising behind the hills, sometimes in the afternoon when the ranch was quiet and the workers were resting. Emily never asked him to visit, and he never made a big deal about coming. He just appeared with a warm smile, a cup of fresh coffee, and a calm presence that somehow made everything feel a little less heavy. At first, Emily felt shy and awkward. She didn't understand why he cared so much. She didn't understand what he saw in her. She tried to keep her conversations short, afraid she would accidentally say something that showed how insecure she still was. But Luke didn't seem bothered by her hesitation. He talked when she wanted to listen, stayed silent when she needed quiet, and never crossed any line that made her uncomfortable. He respected her space more than she respected herself. Sometimes he sat beside her while she rested on the porch, and they watched the horses roam in the distance. He would talk about simple things, how the weather was changing, how one of the young horses was finally learning to follow commands, how Mrs. Collins kept hiding cookies in the kitchen cabinets as if no one would notice. Emily found herself laughing more than she had in a long time. His calm, Patient nature slowly began to melt the ice around her heart. One afternoon, when the wind was soft and the sky was warm, Emily asked him a question she had been scared to ask. "Why do you keep coming here?" Luke took a moment before answering. He shifted his hat, looked at the ground, and then looked back at her with gentle eyes. "Because I want to," he said simply, "and because I care." Emily felt her chest tighten, but not in a painful way, more in a surprised way. No one had said something like that to her in a very long time. She didn't know how to respond, so she looked away toward the hills. Luke didn't push her to say anything else. He just stayed beside her, allowing the quiet moment to settle softly between them. As the days passed, Emily's arm started to heal, but her heart was still unsure. She had spent so long believing she was not enough, too hurt, too tired, too broken. The idea that someone could care for her without asking anything in return felt almost unreal. She feared that trusting someone again would end in the same heartbreak she had suffered before. Sometimes at night, she lay awake thinking about the past. She remembered the way she had felt when her old life fell apart. She remembered the days when she cried without making a sound, afraid someone might hear her weakness. She remembered the loneliness that sat on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. But then she thought of Luke, his kindness, his patience, his quiet sincerity, and something inside her shifted. Maybe she didn't have to be afraid forever. One morning, Emily decided to take a slow walk to the horse barn. Her doctor had advised her to move around gently to help regain her strength. The sun was shining brightly, and the smell of fresh hay brought a soft comfort to her mind. As she reached the barn, she saw Luke inside, repairing a broken wooden gate. He had rolled up his sleeves, and his brow was slightly lined with sweat as he concentrated on his work. When he saw her standing there, his face lit up. "You're out early today," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "How's the arm feeling?" "Better," she replied honestly. "Still a little sore, but better." He nodded, pleased. "You're healing well." Emily stepped closer, watching him work. She liked how focused he was, how gentle he handled the tools, and how he always checked twice before making a final decision. It was funny she had known him for weeks, but she still felt like she was discovering small things about him every day. "Luke," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" He turned to her immediately, giving her his full attention. That was something he always did. He never made her feel like her words were unimportant. "Of course," he replied. She hesitated, then spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "I'm scared of trusting someone again. I'm scared of getting hurt like before, and I don't want to misunderstand anything." She paused, feeling her throat tighten with nerves. "Why are you really doing all this for me?" Luke put down the hammer and leaned lightly against the wooden post. His eyes softened with understanding. "Emily," he began, "I'm not here to rush you, or confuse you, or make you feel like you owe me anything. I'm here because I care about you, not because of what you can offer, not because of what you've lost, and not because I think you need fixing. I'm here because your heart still matters. You still matter." Emily felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were not painful tears. They were the kind that came when someone finally saw her, really saw her after a long time. "I'm not asking you to trust me in one day," Luke continued gently. "I'm just asking for the chance to walk beside you while you heal. At your pace. With your comfort. You're not alone anymore. Unless you choose to be." Those words settled deep inside her, like seeds planted in soft soil. For so long, she had believed her story was finished, that her heart had nothing left to offer. But now, with Luke standing before her, she realized something important. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect to be worthy of care. Maybe what was left of her was still enough to build a new beginning. She wiped her tears and took a slow breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what the future holds, but I think I'd like to try. Slowly, carefully, but try." Luke's smile grew warm and sincere. "That's all I hoped for." From that day forward, something changed, not in a dramatic or sudden way, but gently, like morning light spreading across the fields. Emily allowed herself small steps of trust. She talked more openly. She smiled more often. She didn't hide her fears, and Luke never judged them. He walked beside her, steady and patient, giving her the space to grow at her own pace. Mrs. Collins noticed the change too. One evening, she smiled knowingly at Emily and said, "Healing doesn't always come in big moments. Sometimes it comes in small steps with the right person beside you." Emily knew she was right. Weeks later, as her arm fully healed and she returned to her tasks with renewed strength, she realized Luke hadn't saved her. He had simply reminded her that she was still worth saving. And that made all the difference. Emily no longer believed she was unwanted. She no longer saw herself as someone broken. She had survived heartbreak. But she had also discovered something new. Her own courage, her own hope, and a gentle love that grew slowly, like a quiet sunrise. And when she looked at Luke, she knew one thing for certain. She was not alone anymore. Not in her heart, not in her fears, and not in her future. With patience, kindness, and a soft steadiness, the cowboy had helped her rebuild what remained. Not by replacing what was lost, but by giving value to what was left. And that was enough.